some small rural road in New Zealand with an autopilot making the decisions for me on a gravel road shared with Land Rovers, you're deluded. I actually trust humans quite a lot more at the present.
All right. Reducing the road speed climb to 70 k's an hour in places where there aren't median barriers, which you have historically also talked to us about a bit. It does seem likely to influence thinking here. How would New Zealanders accept that or not, do you think?
Well, not. So, the thing is this. I mean, first of all, there are some roads in New Zealand where I fully support dropping the speed limit to 70 or 80 because they're just too dangerous, and it's ridiculous to have a 100k speed limit on a road where it's clearly not possible to drive safely on it. But, as I go hoarse pointing out, about 80% of the road toll occurs below, not above, the speed limit. Of the 20% of accidents that occur above the speed limit, most are caused by either yobbos, impaired drivers, or outlaw motorcyclists. All these groups tend to ignore speed limits anyway.
So why, if your figures are true, why are we fixated then on the speed? What do you think?
It's the same as remember, in the 1984, they said if we deregulated the banking sector, the economy would boom with no downside. You get geeks coming up with very clever theories that are not wrong, they're just missing out a whole hunks of the equation. And I've always got a feeling that you should be aware of geeks bearing gifts. Because you often end up with situations you weren't intending in the first place. I mean, if you actually look at why the road toll is rising, I mean, it's been on a downward trajectory since the late 1980s, but why the road toll is going up is mostly just motorcyclists and truck accidents. Believe it or not, truck accidents are nearly a quarter of the road toll now. And motorcyclists are not as much as that, but they're not far behind. So if you want to really do something about it, also American research shows that over a quarter of all fatalities now are linked to smartphone use.
And that's not surprising.
Not even enforcing it.
When you see how many of them in the cars. Damien.
Yeah, Clive, can I just ask, what's the downside in, say, reducing the speed limit by 10 k's, other than our sense of entitlement? I mean, if it improves fuel efficiency, we used to be told, and it does cut off some fatalities, what's the downside?
Well, first of all, you get a de facto speed limit that's much lower than that. When going through, in holiday times, you get someone in the left-hand lane on a windy road, and at the front of the queue going 80. So then this goes on for 30 kilometres, and then there's a passing lane, but everyone's too scared of getting a ticket. So, and the person in the left-hand lane now moves up, because it's a nice straight road, moves up to 100k and no one overtakes. Now, that research suggests that actually causes accidents, because you get people, if you're on your way to your daughter's wedding or someone's funeral, what are you going to do? You're going to eventually just take a risk and overtake, which would not have happened if the system had been set up with a little bit more flow in mind. And I have to, repeat that you can slow me down, you can't slow the yobbos down, and they're the people that should be being targeted.
Clive Matthew Wilson, thank you for joining us on the panel. Claire Matthews, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Jim.
And Damien Christie, nice to see you as always.
You too, Jim.
And that's us for another day. Thank you, everybody. 2:37 for 7 New Zealand, 15 overs left. We are holding on in the cricket. We are back on tomorrow. Checkpoint is coming right up.
Tō te maira e o hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, the government's 10-year transport plan just out in the last hour signals a major increase in public transport spending and a boost to rapid rail. Jane Patterson is going to join us live. The Black Ferns are in isolation on the Sunshine Coast after Ruby Tui is diagnosed with mumps. On the eve of the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony, 12 earthquakes including 2 over a magnitude 4.5, have rattled the west coast near the Alpine Fault. This comes as Tower Insurance confirms price hikes for its customers living in quake-prone cities like Wellington, of course. Richie's looks overseas to recruit bus drivers. And why don't people want to become teachers? We go to a school to find out.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The government has signalled a major increase in public transport funding and a cut in state highway funding. A draft policy statement on land transport indicates more spending on upgrading regional roads and local roads. Speed limits on high-risk roads could also be reviewed. The Prime Minister says increases in fuel excise tax and road user charges are in the frame, but at the lower end of what the previous Transport Minister was considering.
Simon Bridges was told that in order to meet his last government's ambitions around dual carriage highways and large-scale roading projects, they would need to increase excise by between 10 and 20 cents. We're consulting on the lower end of that range.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. An American tourist has been charged in relation to a crash near Kirikiri last night that killed 2 people. The 21-year-old man was the driver of a people mover that hit a Subaru head-on, killing the driver and injuring a passenger who later died in hospital. 2 other passengers in the Subaru were also injured. The American visitor and his passenger suffered minor injuries. He's been bailed on 2 counts of careless driving causing death and will appear in the Ngapuhi District Court on Friday. Meanwhile, State Highway 1 just south of Wellsford has been reopened after a fatal crash earlier this afternoon. The homeowners advocacy group EQC Fix says it's concerned people will forego insurance when Tower ups its charges for people in quake-prone regions. The company has announced that thousands of its customers will have to start paying hundreds of dollars more for home insurance as it switches to risk-based pricing. IAG, which owns State, AMI and NZI, are underwriters for Westpac, says it's made no decision about doing the same but continues to review its position. Mel Burke of EQC Fix says if this becomes a trend, people living in quake-prone places might ditch insurance altogether.
What we might see is more and more people uninsured. That would be concerning. So, like if we're now looking at Wellington or Christchurch is high earthquake prone and people literally cannot afford insurance, that is a downside.
Mel Burke of EQC Fix. The Tasman District Council says it'll cost up to $12 million to repair cyclone-damaged public infrastructure. The 2 former tropical cyclones that struck the top of the South Island in February hit the Tasman District especially hard, causing widespread damage to homes, roads, bridges and public reserves. Teams of welfare staff and volunteers have since visited 630 properties in Tasman and Nelson City. Rewaka resident Katie Ferguson, who was forced to evacuate with her husband and young family, says the Red Cross has visited them several times.
I feel so lucky that we've got that available to us, in New Zealand. They just, checked up on us, made sure we're okay, gave us some information. They also called back 2 or 3 times just to make sure everyone was okay.
Katie Ferguson, more than 30 properties are still considered vulnerable, 7 of them high priority. A bus drivers' union is accusing Auckland Transport of driving down wages. The agency has awarded Ritchie's Coach Lines the contract to run buses on the North Shore. Ritchie says it hasn't been able to find enough local drivers for the route and has applied to Immigration New Zealand to bring 110 drivers in from overseas. A First Union spokesperson, Graham McKean, says the company won the contract by undercutting competitors with a lowball bid made possible by its willingness to pay low wages.
Auckland Transport is effectively rewarding low-paying companies by giving them a greater share of the market. And what that does is it creates like a gravitational pull and drags down the terms and conditions of all the other bus drivers.
Graham McKean, Auckland Transport says it has no control over the wages paid to drivers. The Treaty Negotiations Minister, Andrew Little, says a Ngapuhi function at Parliament this evening is not a government event and he won't be attending. The Ngapuhi Runanga, led by Sunny Tau, is holding a hui at the Beehive tonight. Mr Little says the function has nothing to do with negotiations over the Ngapuhi mandate. He says any organisation can book facilities at Parliament if an MP agrees to host it, and that is what the Runanga has done. He says the MP for Te Tai Tokoro, Calvin Davis, is officially hosting the event, but that's a formality. It's 5 past 5. England still need 3 wickets to win the second test against New Zealand in Christchurch. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 237 for 7, needing to survive at least another 16 overs on the final day to draw the game and win the series. And New Zealand Commonwealth Games women's rugby sevens player has contracted mumps and is in isolation. Ruby Tui is being supported by a team doctor at her team's pre-games camp on the Sunshine Coast. The rest of the team will remain in isolation while further assessments are made. Kat Fata-Simpkins has already been ruled out with a leg injury. And the flag bearer to lead the New Zealand contingent into tomorrow evening's opening ceremony will be announced later tonight. Sports editor Stephen Hewson says there's no clear favourite.
World champion shot putter Tom Walsh and 9-time Paralympic gold medalist Sophie Pascoe appear to be the prime contenders for flag bearer. Walsh, who won a silver medal in the shot put at the Glasgow Games 4 years ago, arrived on the Gold Coast this morning and has become one of the leading lights in the sport over the past 4 years. For the first time, the parasport competition is part of the regular program at these games, and with Pascoe undoubtedly set for a string of medals in the pool, could fit the bill as team captain. It would also underline the message of inclusivity, which these games are trying to promote. Other athletes likely to have been considered for the role include cyclist Hamish Bond and triathlete Andrea Hewitt. On the Gold Coast, Stephen Hewson.
And the opening ceremony at Carrara Stadium is tomorrow night. And that's the news.
Selling on.
We're all assembling on the west coast of the United States over the next 24 to 48 hours.
And why do you want to buy the Warriors?
Well, it's a fantastic organisation.
Signing off.
Connie Lawn, Radio New Zealand News, Washington.
And defending a legacy.
And obviously what you've had on today about the power supply issues is news to me, and look, I couldn't tell you whether it's news to Jonathan.
Stay tuned to Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the Australian lawyer leading the bid to prosecute Aung San Suu Kyi on charges of crimes against humanity. And after 10, Insta-poet Lang Liav on her musings about love, loss and her debut coming-of-age novel, Sad Girls. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Med-Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Long, fine spells. A few showers developing late tomorrow morning. Waikato to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Cloudy periods, a few showers clearing south of Taranaki tomorrow morning and elsewhere by Wednesday evening. Gisborne to Wairirapa, also Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Nelson, isolated showers clearing and becoming fine. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland showers with rain developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading to Westland tomorrow morning. For Southland, showers about the coast and Stewart Island, spreading inland tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and 1 or 2 showers. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much. Anna Thomas. There's more breaking news than when the bull does enter the China shop tonight, so we're keeping an eye on everything. Let's begin with the government's announcement about an hour ago. An increase in petrol tax and lower speed limits on some of the country's most dangerous roads could be on the cards under the government's new transport plans. It's also signalled a major increase to public transport funding, initiatives to encourage walking and cycling, and a cut in funding for state highways. All of this has been laid out in a draft policy statement that the public can respond to over the next month. Our political editor Jane Patterson was there when the announcement was being made and joins us now live from Parliament. Jane, lovely to have you with us. I know you've only had an hour to digest all of this stuff, but a lot of it is about the ideological differences right around transport between a Labor Greens government and the previous National government.
That's right, John, and much of this information in this draft policy statement on land transport has been well signalled by Labor and the Greens. Of course, much of it was a criticism of the way the National government allocated and prioritised transport spending when it was in government over the 9 years. We'd heard a lot from them, from Labor and the Greens. Now they get the chance in government to put it into practice. So what we're seeing as a result is a much greater spend on public transport. The the funding on that will have a 46% increase. There is also a 240% increase for walking and cycling improvements. I must say, though, that's coming off a very low base, so the nominal figure, the increase sounds good, but it's probably not as big as it sounds.
Yeah.
But also scaling back on state highways, there's going to be an 11% decrease on the money that the government spends on state highway improvements. And under the national government, last year they signalled that spend would roughly be about $9.1 billion over 4 years.
Right, so in monetary terms, an 11% decrease there on RONs, roads of national significance, is big news. A 240% increase in monetary terms on cycling is not such a big deal. The public transport is the push, isn't it? And also, of course, people will be talking about regional fuel taxes. Now, a regional fuel tax was already signalled pre-election for Auckland. What are we going to see over and above that?
So the news in terms of the petrol tax isn't quite so good for Aucklanders. As you say, the regional fuel tax that is, as the name would suggest, just for Auckland, that kicks on the 1st of July, and that's going to be 10 cents extra per litre for petrol and diesel. Now, Jacinda Ardern and the Transport Minister Phil Twyford have also been signalling a potential 9 to 12 cent a litre increase to basically fund this plan. Now, they also took the opportunity to throw a dig at the former National Party Transport Minister Simon Bridges and the government, and they said that he was considering up to a 20 cent per litre excise tax to fund their transport plans. What we don't know is what he would have decided, of course, but Ms Ardern and Phil Twyford said that the government's looking at the lower end of that for their purposes, so between 9 and 12 cents over 3 years could be put on the price of petrol to fund this plan.
Of course, you increase the tax on petrol and that happens relatively quickly, but the stuff it's paying for, like increased public transport, light rail, takes much longer to see. And so you are selling the idea of this plan, aren't you? Public submissions being sought, interest groups, everyone is allowed to have some kind of input. What reaction would you expect, Jane, to this?
Well, one interesting point of this is the signal that the government wants to double spending on regional and local roads. So their argument is that so much of activity and people's transport happens on those roads rather than what they describe as the wasteful and very selective hand-picked roads of national significance that the government prioritised. So I would expect a pretty good reaction from the regions. Of course, there's always a big demand and a tension between local government spending and central government spending in terms of the upkeep of those roads, so that has been signalled as a priority. And you did mention it, but rail as well, a big aspect of this transport plan. Kiwi Rail will now be also aligned with the Land Transport Funding Fund, the National Land Transport Fund, which Labour had been calling for in opposition. So again, a real signal about the importance of rail. So given Auckland's congestion and potentially in other cities like Wellington, that might be a welcome move as well. But I think people always do respond to any increase in petrol tax, and not always welcome news. But the other aspect of this too, talking about road safety, a major focus of this, and as part of that, the top 10 most dangerous places or roading networks in New Zealand will be reviewed, and a decrease to the speed limit could be looked at in those areas.
Thanks, Jane Patterson, our political editor, who was there. Also there, of course, Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, Phil Twyford, the Transport Minister, and interestingly, Shane Jones, New Zealand First now. He was there on behalf of the regions. He's also Associate Transport Minister, but really wearing that regional hat. And the other Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter, from the Greens. So this is very much a coalition policy. It's just out. There will be feedback on it before it is finalised. We would love your feedback immediately. Text us 2101. But one of the things that is being discussed is the speed limit on some open roads, particularly country roads. Farmers and truck drivers are balking at the idea of a speed limit being lowered to 70k in some areas, saying the government would be better look at improving roading infrastructure. Well, that's happening in some of the regions, but the roads of national significance having a reduced spend. The International Transport Forum, an intergovernment organisation with 59 member countries, including New Zealand, has suggested a maximum speed limit of 70k an hour on all rural roads which don't have median barriers. And as most of us will know, that is a hell of a lot of rural roads. Jonathan Mitchell reports.
The Automobile Association recently asked its members about reducing speed limits on New Zealand roads, and spokesperson Mike Noon says it proved to be a sensitive issue.
We did ask them for their views on reducing the open speed limit from 100 kilometres an hour to 90 kilometres an hour, and that came up with an 87% oppose. And we also asked them about reducing the urban area from 50 kilometres an hour to 40 kilometres an hour, and that urban area speed limit came up with an 80% opposition.
He says roads should be assessed on a case-by-case basis because a blanket approach won't work. New Zealand's Road Transport Forum, which represents the commercial road freight industry, says there's about 12,000 kilometres of state highways here, but median barriers are a rare sight. Chief Executive Ken Shirley says the International Transport Forum's recommendations, which also include reducing speed limits on urban roads from 50 kilometres an hour to 30 kilometres an hour, are excessive.
30 kilometres an hour is very slow. I think the frustrations that would go with that would actually create more problems. And equally on an open road, particularly on a good, clear road, 70 kilometres an hour is too slow.
He says the actual problem is getting drivers to stick to the current speed limits. Federated Farmers President Katie Milne says reducing the speed is a step in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I just think it's going to slow down way too much the basics of commerce and people getting around in New Zealand in general, and the frustration level that would go with that, which we already do strike when we strike in places slower tourists. I think it would just actually create havoc versus the desired outcome, which is less accidents.
She says rural roads are being unfairly targeted.
Some rural roads are more dangerous than others, and I think it speaks more to the fact that you should make sure they're well maintained and upkept, especially the gravel roads, so that when people who are not used to them, as in tourists and so on, are out on them, they have a better experience.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says infrastructure spending is the way to go.
Look, there are certainly areas that we can hone in on where there's enough evidence to suggest it would make a difference, and that's what we should be doing, relying on the evidence that tells us what will make sure that people are safe on our roads.
Ms Ardern says median barriers are just one option to consider, as evidence shows they force drivers to slow down and ultimately make roads safer. Last year, the Transport Agency raised the speed limit on a couple of state highways in the North Island to 110 kilometres per hour, describing them as the safest in the country. But it says the speed limits are just that, and drivers should not see them as a minimum target. For Checkpoint, Jonathan Mitchell.
Let's cross the Tasman now with the women's sevens team, that is rugby of course, is in isolation on the Sunshine Coast after one player was diagnosed with mumps. On the eve of the Commonwealth Games opening ceremony, Blackfern Ruby Tui has been struck down, and she and her teammates remain in isolation pending health checks. Key player Ruby Tui. The team was due to check into the Athletes Village tomorrow. Joining us now from the Gold Coast is our sports editor Stephen Hewson. Goodness gracious me, mumps on the eve of the Commonwealth Games. What more can you tell us? Has it been confirmed, Stephen, that Ruby Tui has mumps, and what will this mean for the Black Ferns?
Well, it means pretty much, John, that she's going to be out of the tournament. As you mentioned, they're in isolation on the Sunshine Coast, which is sort of an hour and a half north of where we are on the Gold Coast. I suppose, fortunately for the Black Ferns, the tournament doesn't actually get underway for another week and a half. I think the first game's on Friday, April the 13th. But it's pretty... It's hard for the rugby sevens, both the men and the women. It's been tough going for them because they've had a bunch of players out through injury and illness. Yeah. I mean, the women's sevens have also lost Kat Fata Simpkins, who's through a leg injury. On top of that, the men's team have lost a couple of players as well. We've got Ngapuhi Hui Black, he's out, and Caleb Clark has got appendicitis. So it's been a rough ride for the sevens players, and as you mentioned, the mumps has come on top of all of that.
What's the team doctor saying? Obviously, these players practice in close proximity. They spend a lot of time very close to each other, sometimes literally on top of each other during tackling practice and in scrum practice and all that kind of stuff. Any statement from the team doctor about whether other players could or do have it?
No, there's been no word yet on the rest of the team. I suppose obviously they're keeping the entire team in isolation. They were due to come into the village tomorrow, the Athletes Village on the Gold Coast, but obviously keeping them away from the rest of the team. I mean, you've got to remember, you've got 6,500 athletes competing at these games, so I dare say that there's always going to be illness and ailments. It just seems pretty tough on the Sevens team that they've had all these injuries and illness come at once.
So none of the Sevens team are going to be the flag bearer, obviously, and they're unlikely to be, I guess, at the opening ceremony. Who's your money on, Stephen, for the flag bearer? Obviously, Valerie Adams, Tom Walsh are out. People talking about Eliza McCartney as a possibility. Who are you picking will carry the flag for the New Zealand team?
Well, yeah, Tom Walsh is a candidate. I mean, he's arrived here on the Gold Coast today, and he doesn't compete for another week or so. So you might ask why has he arrived so early? Maybe to acclimatise. Maybe he's the one. Sophie Pascoe, I would have thought possibly a leading contender. I mean, she's been at several Commonwealth Games. She's had 9 Paralympic medals. And the Paralympic program, remember, is part of the general program this time, which is the first time that's been the case at these Commonwealth Games. And what a way or message to say if we had Sophie Pascoe as the flag bearer for tomorrow night's ceremony. Yeah. I suppose you could toss in a few other names. Andrea Hewitt's been around for a few games. Hamish Bond, switching from rowing to cycling. Usually you get a bit of an idea or a handle on the way these things are going to go, but it's a tough one, this one. It makes it a bit more interesting as to just how things are going to pan out. But my guess, Tom Walsh or Sophie Pascoe is who I'd be going for.
OK, I hadn't realised Tom Walsh was there because it's so long before he competes. So as you say, his presence may be a hint, Stephen.
It could indeed, John, or it could be simply to put us off the trail.
Yeah, it could be good. And he's a good bugger and he wants to take part in the opening ceremony. Stephen Houston, just before you go, anything more on the needles? This is a bizarre story. Anything further to add on that?
No, well, we were told earlier on today that the finding was due out at some point today. Obviously, they've said, the Commonwealth Games Federation have said that the needle, they're looking into the needles as a breach of the no needle policy in the village, which essentially means they're not looking at it as a doping issue. They believe in the syringes were vitamins. The Indian team put its hand up and said that they were the ones that were having to meet with the Commonwealth Games Federation, and they were having that meeting this morning. So we're still waiting the outcome of any possible sanctions that might mean.
Stephen Houston, our sports editor, who is over the Tasman for the Games and will be reporting for us throughout. Thank you very much indeed. It's 22 minutes past 5. 12 earthquakes, including 2 of a magnitude over 4.5, have rattled the west coast this afternoon. Well, one was 4.5, the other 4.8, struck just after 1 o'clock near Hokitika at a depth of just 5 kilometres, so shallow. They're not big in themselves or damaging. But GNS duty seismologist Natalie Balfour told me a short time ago, being located so near the Alpine Fault, which is obviously so big and so important, the quakes are a timely warning for people and indeed the entire country. Be prepared.
So we've had quite a lot of activity in the South Island near the west coast, quite close to the Alpine Fault. There has been 2 earthquakes over a magnitude 4.5. So it's a little bit unusual to get them close together. And then there's been some magnitude 3s and, a little bit of activity ever since. So it's quietening down now. So over the last, the majority of the activity was between sort of 1 and 1:30 today. And we had about 12 earthquakes located on our system between 1 and 3:30.
And whereabouts were the ones that were 4.5 or thereabouts? Where were they located?
So they all happened quite close together. It's right sort of in the Southern Alps area, so not where a lot of people are located, but there were about 200 reports of people feeling the earthquake from around, say, Hokitika in the Greymouth area.
And quite shallow, I understand, both of the larger ones.
Yeah, so both of them are around 5 kilometres deep, and that's quite shallow. Certainly those are the ones that will be felt fairly strongly.
And so, Natalie, what are we to read into activity around the Alpine Fault? It's tempting always, the moment we hear the words Alpine Fault, for there to be a sharp intake of breath. But are we to draw any conclusions from this?
Look, I always, when this activity happens, it gets me a little bit, my heart racing as well, because it is obviously a large fault. It's a plate-bounding fault, so it's very It's capable of quite large earthquakes, and so it is always a really good, I guess, reminder for us to, ask those questions about, are we prepared for such an event to occur? And we certainly keep an eye on it here as well, to sort of look at, is this something that's dying off again, or that sort of thing. But there's not really much concrete evidence of precursors and that sort of thing. It's hard to know anything until after a big event has occurred. But it's certainly a good reminder that when you get this activity, that there could be a larger event to follow, and to make sure that you're prepared. And there's lots of wonderful resources on the Get Ready, Get Through website that's done by the Ministry of Civil Defence and Emergency Management on how to prepare for such an event.
Natalie Belfer from GNS, a lobby group for earthquake claimants, says it's concerned some homeowners in quake-prone areas won't be able to afford to keep up insurance payments as Tower Insurance hikes up fees in those regions. The company has announced that from April 1st, which of course we've had, thousands of its customers started paying hundreds of dollars more for home insurance as it switched to risk-based pricing. Jessie Chang explains.
It's bad news for Tower Insurance customers in places like Wellington, Napier and Gisborne. Its chief executive Richard Harding says hundreds of residents living in those quake-prone cities will face insurance hikes. 500
odd will get significant increases over $2,000, and the rest will get increases, say over the other 1.5%. Get increases over the $250.
Mr Harding says the move to risk-based pricing is a fairer, more equitable way to operate. He says regions at greater risk have already been paying more for house insurance, but this doesn't cover the full cost. Mr Harding says other customers are paying too much.
It takes about 6 Auckland households to subsidise each Wellington household in terms of insurance. And that means obviously the benefit will flow to those people in Auckland who have lower risk properties and elsewhere in the countryside.
Mr Harding expects Tower may lose some customers, but he expects other insurance companies will also follow suit. Insurance giant IAG, which manages state AMI and New Zealand Insurance and underwrites for Westpac, says no decision has been made to make the same move, but it continues to review its business and position. But Mel Burke from the claimant advocacy group EQC Fix says if this becomes a trend, it's worried residents living in quake-prone locations will simply forego insurance altogether.
What we might see is more and more people uninsured. That would be concerning. So if we're now looking at Wellington or Christchurch as high earthquake-prone and people literally cannot afford insurance, that is a downside.
Ms Burke says there should be more protections in place from the government for those people.
If we have a large-scale disaster and the percentage of uninsured homes has increased, then we've got incredibly vulnerable people that will need support. So we can sit here and be brutal and say, well, they didn't have insurance, so too bad, but there's a humanitarian aspect in that would still need to be addressed.
The Chief Executive of the Insurance Council, Tim Grafton, says there needs to be a combined response from central and local government, as well as insurers, to deal with areas prone to natural disasters.
A sit on your hands and do nothing option is not the way forward. Sitting down and thinking, well, what are the adaptive pathways forwards where we can look to make short to medium-term measures to protect properties.
Last month, the government moved to increase the maximum payout from $100,000 to $150,000 under the Earthquake Commission Act. It also increased the length of time to make a claim. At the time, the EQC Minister Megan Woods said she wouldn't be surprised if further changes were made in the future. For Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang, TNA.
Real transport theme tonight. This is a continuation of it. A bus company wants to recruit more than 100 drivers from overseas because it can't find enough people to do the job here. Auckland Transport awarded Ritchie's Coach Lines the contract to run buses on Auckland's North Shore from September. The company has asked Immigration New Zealand if it can bring in 110 drivers from overseas to make up for a shortage of drivers in this country. But the drivers' union says the only reason Ritchie's won the contract was because it was willing to undercut the wages offered by other companies, and allowing it to employ foreign drivers would start a downwards pay spiral. Conan Young reports.
Ritchie says it's been trying to find locals to take up jobs on its newly acquired North Shore run with the help of Work and Income. But its spokesperson Matthew Todd says they've only managed to find 15 new drivers in the last month. This is despite offering them 6 to 8 weeks paid training.
It's very difficult to get people into the buses. We have a lot of people who have the relevant licences. We get tripped up a lot when it comes to criminal history checks. It's unfortunate to say, but passing drug tests as well. Some of the people that come in, driving a bus is you need to be a fit and proper person.
Matthew Todd says Ritchie's will continue trying to recruit locally, but only has until late June before it will need to look overseas for drivers, including Fiji, Samoa and the Philippines. He admits the $20.20 an hour it pays drivers would be difficult to get by on in Auckland, but says this is the budget they have to work with.
Let's face it, there's any job in the world. If you pay enough, yeah, you'll get people to do it, but when does it become those costs will have to be passed on?
Matthew Todd says they are limited by the amount that Auckland Transport is willing to pay for Ritchie's to provide public transport on the North Shore.
It does sound like a very simple thing of, just pay some people more and we'll go away. I think the issue is much deeper and much more complicated than that, and I think it needs to be discussed between transport operators, the unions and local councils.
But the Drivers' Union is urging Immigration New Zealand to turn down Ritchie's request to bring in drivers from other countries. Graham McKean from First Union says there's no driver shortage and the move is more about driving down wages.
The problem with Ritchie's is that they pay over $1 an hour less than the industry, so their retention rates are minimal. People get trained up and then they'll go to other bus companies where the rates are better. Again, Ritchie's brings it upon themselves. If they paid market rates, it would be a different conversation.
Graham McKean says Ritchie's won the North Shore contract by undercutting its competitors with a low-ball tender made possible by its willingness to pay low wages.
Auckland Transport is the villain here. Auckland Transport is effectively rewarding low-paying companies by giving them a greater share of the market. And what that does is it creates like a gravitational pull and drags down the terms and conditions of all the other bus drivers.
An Auckland Transport spokesperson declined a request for an interview, noting it was the bus companies who set wages and conditions. Immigration New Zealand says it will consult with groups, including unions, before it decides if it will allow Ritchie's to employ overseas drivers, but notes it must be established the workers cannot be found locally. The Minister for Transport, Phil Twyford, is currently reviewing the way public transport is funded to see if this is having an impact on employment conditions. For Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Thank you for being with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up, the Black Caps are chasing a draw and therefore a win against England. Quite a remarkable state of affairs. Wagner and Sodhi still there. The big dead bat is up. They aren't scoring any runs, but they are surviving and they have to survive for 7 more overs. The game will be drawn and the series will be won. Singing mourners gather outside the home of controversial South African anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela, who's died at the age of 81. A day in the life of an Auckland teacher, because the number of people wanting to become teachers is down so dramatically, and of course the wage round is coming up. So we went to school, and more coming up before 6. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. Nona is back with business news in the Auckland studio this week. But before it all, on the other side of me, Anna Thomas with headlines.
Thanks, John. A major increase to public transport funding is being signalled by the government, which also wants initiatives to encourage walking and cycling and more funding for regional roads. The draft government policy statement 2018 says speed limits on high-risk roads could also be reviewed, as the government signalled road safety as one of its main transport priorities. An American tourist has been charged with careless driving causing death following a crash near Kirikiri last night that killed 2 people. The 21-year-old man was the driver of a people mover that hit a Subaru head-on, killing the driver and injuring a passenger who later died in hospital. Meanwhile, State Highway 1 just south of Wellsford has been reopened after a fatal crash early this afternoon. Flooding on Whanganui's Anzac Parade is being accepted as a fact of life, and people owning buildings in the area are being encouraged to move or raise their houses above the waterline. The Manawatu Whanganui Regional Council is planning a managed retreat from the flood-prone street instead. In its long-term plan, the council says it doesn't want to invest in further flood protection for Anzac Parade because it's too difficult and too expensive. The Tasman District Council says it will cost up to $12 million to repair cyclone-damaged public infrastructure. The two former tropical cyclones that struck the top of the South Island in February hit the Tasman District especially hard, causing widespread damage to homes, roads, bridges and public reserves. A council report says some repair projects will take several months to complete, while others are well underway. An advocacy group for earthquake-affected homeowners is worried people will forgo insurance as tower insurance moves to hike fees in earthquake-prone regions. Thousands of the company's customers will soon have to start paying hundreds of dollars more for home insurance as it switches to risk-based pricing. And other insurance companies say they're reviewing their policies. And that's the news.
Thank you very much indeed. 6.3 overs remaining in the cricket. So what's that? 6 sixes are 36 and 3. It's in 2 now. So 38 balls, Nona?
38 balls.
38 balls the New Zealanders have to survive. Then they draw the game and win the series. One of the perverse and wonderful things about cricket is that when nothing happens, sometimes it can be really exciting.
Oh, that's like business.
Yeah. Well, is it?
Well, sure. When nothing happens, things can be very exciting.
Nice segue. No, we'll keep an eye on the cricket, but nice segue to business because that's what you're here to discuss.
That's it.
Being a Canadian, you wouldn't even like cricket, would you?
Oh, no, I love cricket.
Oh,
Come
go,
on.
Nona.
It's exciting, right?
Right.
All that drama.
The medical, you're taking the mickey. Now, the medical company Orion Health is restructuring and cutting costs as it battles to break even.
Yeah.
Costs in terms of what and how much is it hoping to save?
Well, look, it's going to reorganise into 3 main businesses. So at the moment, it's been really struggling, this company. It's trying to break even. I'm not sure if it's going to be able to do that, but it's reduced its spending. It's planning to reduce its spending by between $25 and $30 million. That's an awful lot. They have reduced their revenue forecast. They are going to hope to make between 170 and 173 million. That compares with the earlier forecast of 175 to 190. So, yeah, it's a difficult company to manage. They have they listed it, with a great lot of fanfare.
I remember that. Real excitement
Yes,
and real
it
promise
really was.
and a real sense of potential.
Yeah, and I remember the debut was at their headquarters, and it was packed with their shareholders, which many of them were employees. The company's debut, was really quite a big event. The share price at that time was, $6.79, and today it dropped almost 9% to 64 cents.
Holy guacamole.
And that's not very long.
$6.79.
That was in November 2014. So today, $6.79 then.
So you lost $6.
Well, at least, and then more actually. And then a year ago it was $1.72. So it's just been heading down the slope, and that isn't good news for their shareholders, that's for sure. So there's a lot of there should be a lot of value in that company. Let's just see what happens if they can turn it around.
Another challenger to Trade Me. Boy, there's a lot of would-be Trade Me's out there. This one's called All Goods, the Christchurch-based. What are they planning to do?
Well, look, it's a Christchurch-based company. They've launched a kind of a good-looking site. It looks a lot like Trade Me, if you ask me.
Right.
So, but with
imitation's
pictures,
the
lots of nice
sincerest
pictures.
form of flattery, Nona.
Yeah, I guess so. They say themselves as being different. They've split their platform into sort of new products versus used ones, and companies selling new products pay a fee, but those selling used products pay none. So we'll see what happens with them. I don't know to what extent it made an impact, because Trade Me share price was down 2%, which is interesting. That's only 8 cents, mind you, to $4.35. And that's really when the market itself was having a pretty positive day, surprisingly. I mean, our market finished up 11 points. Now, that's not a lot, but when you consider that Wall Street was down 2% across the major indices,
That's quite significant.
And we've had a weekend to stew on that, right? So yeah.
11 points up to 8,330. And, you know, Asia sort of did settle somewhat as well after the big hit on Wall Street. And that's partly because of the trade that we've been seeing, some issues there. So it's not cricket. It's the markets. We finished down, so up 11 points to 8,330. New Zealand dollar is also steady, 72.3 US cents, 94 Australian, and 51.4 pence.
5.1 overs remaining, 31 balls for Wagner and Sodhi to survive. Thank you, Nona Peltier.
I'll leave it with you.
Well, yeah, we appreciate it. Business from Nona. Let's go to the weather now. Mid-service meteorologist John Law is standing by. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. As we go through in towards Wednesday, we are going to find a weakening feature moving northwards up across the North Island, bringing with it a little bit more cloud, and for the likes of Auckland, perhaps a few showers arriving later in the day. But plenty of dry weather and still pretty mild as well. Top temperatures in Auckland, 24 degrees Celsius. We might also find a few of those showers in towards the likes of New Plymouth, up through Taranaki, Waitomo, Waikato, and even a few in towards Hamilton as well. But for many of us, there's plenty of dry weather across the North Island. And if you head down towards, like I say, Wellington and up in towards the Kapiti Coast, plenty of dry and sunny conditions as well. And there's more of that sunshine as well down on the eastern side of the North Island, from Gisborne right the way down in towards the Wairarapa. A few early showers across towards Palmerston North and perhaps up in towards Wanganui as well. But even here, they'll clear off through the daytime. Down on the south island, it's an east-west split. Plenty of dry weather on the eastern side through Canterbury, and highs of 24 degrees Celsius again for the likes of Christchurch. But cloudier skies on the western coast of the South Island. Some wetter weather to watch out for there as well. And we are going to find rather a blustery day down in the far southern parts of New Zealand, in through Invercargill. Rather windy story, spells of rain at least through the first part of the day. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Singing mourners have gathered outside the house of controversial South African anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela, who has died at the age of 81. She and her former husband Nelson Mandela were both jailed, of course, and were symbols of the country's anti-apartheid struggle for 3 decades. She died peacefully, surrounded by her family, following a long illness that has kept her in and out of hospital since the start of the year. The BBC's Andrew Harding looks back on her life.
If he became a saintly icon, she was something more complicated. Heroic but flawed. Winnie, the mother of the nation. Her world was transformed at the age of 23 when she met and married Nelson Mandela. He was a lawyer, already active in the underground struggle against racial apartheid, and soon to be sentenced to life imprisonment.
My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people, for the working harmoniously of all the racial groups in this country.
In the lonely years that followed, she and her young daughters were ruthlessly harassed by the white minority government. She said the brutality taught her to hate. In prison, perhaps her husband had it easier. As South Africa's townships erupted in violence, Winnie became an increasingly radical, fiery figurehead.
We bring up the white man's children. We could have killed them any day we wanted to. With our necklaces, we shall liberate this country.
She endorsed the vicious practice of necklacing, putting a burning tyre around those suspected of betraying the cause. And she and her security guards were directly implicated in the abduction and murder of a 14-year-old boy. In 1990, Winnie was there to greet her husband as he walked to freedom and guided South Africa on its miraculous path to democracy. But the years of separation had taken a toll on their marriage. Mandela accused her of infidelity and asked for a divorce.
We have been together since 1958, and whatever is happening is something what causes deep trauma.
In her later years, still active in politics, she was convicted of fraud, but the sidelines were no place for such a grand figure. She bounced back, sometimes cherishing, sometimes resenting her long marriage to Nelson Mandela. She claimed a prominent place at his funeral, then contested his will. But today the extended family has united in mourning her.
The family continues to appreciate this continuous support
The support that we see here in front of us here at our home in Soweto.
It was wrong. She didn't operate for anything that is wrong to speak. She always speak her mind.
We lost a stalwart who is an inspiration, who is still an inspiration even after her passing.
And tonight, many here in South Africa, including a new president, are remembering her courage and defiance.
She was courageous, and in many ways she was also very stubborn. Stubborn on behalf of our people, because she knew that out of her stubborn disposition, she would be able to inspire millions of South Africans.
Winnie Mandela's life mirrored South Africa's own turbulent journey, its violence, its heroism. In life, she was a polarising figure. In death, many here seem inclined to forgive and to celebrate.
Andrew Harding with that report. Andrew Harding with the BBC, of course. It's coming up to 5:45. Just before we move on, a cricket update. 3.2 overs remaining. So 3 sixes, 18s, what's that, 20 balls. Ish Sodhi and Neil Wagner are still there. Now, if you don't follow cricket, these are guys at the bottom of the batting order, and whilst you could expect them to hold the bat up for a wee while, Sodhi has been there for 150 deliveries, Wagner has been there for 85 deliveries. They are delivering well above expectations for them, and they are simply surviving. Now, if they can survive another 19 deliveries, one more ball has gone since I started talking. In fact, we're now down to only 3 overs left. They can survive another 18 deliveries. That means the Black Caps have drawn the game somewhat against the odds and will win the series against England, which is an event to cherish. The home of cricket, of course, England, and beating them doesn't happen terribly often. So very exciting with 18 deliveries to go. Of course, the Black Caps could still lose. Going, gone. Air New Zealand's final flight between Kapiti Coast and Auckland took to the skies this morning, and less than an hour later the airline packed up its stuff and left the airport for good. Locals are outraged Air New Zealand has cut its daily service between the two centres, with 150 of them turning up to a rally at the airport last weekend. Katie Scotcher filed this report from the Kapiti Coast.
Flight 8860 took off from the Kapiti Coast just after 7 this morning and flew into a grey, cloudy sky. About 20 onlookers wearing black T-shirts emblazoned with Fly Kapiti, including acting Mayor James Cootes, district councillors and other community leaders, gathered to farewell the plane. Among the spectators was Pip Sinclair, who worked for Air New Zealand when the airline first came to Kapiti in 2011.
Over the last 8 years, a lot of people when I walked in this morning were regulars that I've met through here. So those people aren't going to be here in the mornings. They're not going to be supporting our cafes. They're not going to be supporting our taxi drivers, our public transport. They're all going to be having to go into Wellington or Palmerston North. So they may have just pulled out as an airport, as an airline, but the actual wider effect is much bigger.
The national carrier announced it was scrapping the service less than a month ago. And Chris Orchard, who owns Island Cafe inside the airport, says the future of his business is now uncertain. He says 80% of the cafe's turnover comes from the airport.
The short term that we've had 3 weeks' notice to rethink our business plan and come up with something new, it's been a bit of a shock for sure. We were looking at shutting up.
Kapiti Coast resident Sandy Beattie, who was on this morning's final flight, regularly uses the service to visit her sick mother in Auckland.
We travel overseas, so I've used it for that, and also for business purposes. So in the last few weeks I've probably flown 3 or 4 times out of here. So it's going to be very inconvenient to have to then get up very, very early and go into Wellington.
Air Chathams have expressed interest in picking up the service, but a final decision won't be made for a few weeks. An airport spokesperson says discussions with the airline are progressing well, but because Air Chatham's aircraft are different to those that previously operated from the airport, technical and regulatory requirements are having to be considered. The Mayor of Kapiti, K. Gurunathan, wasn't able to attend this morning's farewell, but has openly criticised Air New Zealand for giving the council 24 hours notice before publicly announcing it was axing the route. His replacement, acting Mayor James Cootes, is hopeful Air Chathams will take over the service.
I'd like to think we could be standing here in a year's time looking back and we've got more flights out of this airport, better level of service. It's a great family-owned company, so as I think has already been said, quite a good fit for the airport and for Kapiti. You know, when things like this happen, it doesn't always have to be a negative outcome, and you know, I think it's always good to try and turn it around and get the most positive outcome out of it as we can.
Air New Zealand wouldn't allow RNZ to speak to its staff at the airport, take photos of the plane or its signage. And within an hour of the plane's departure, a truck arrived to take away the airline's equipment from the airport. RNZ contacted Air New Zealand to ask about the removal of their equipment and today's flight, but is still waiting for a response. In Wellington for Checkpoint, call Katie Scotchetene.
10.5 to 6. For those of you who regard Ed Sheeran touring New Zealand as something less than a news event, Dunedin has an economic response to that. The city has just had what's been described as its biggest weekend ever in money spent terms after hosting 3 gigs by the pop superstar. Now that might be hyperbole, but an immediate response from Dunedin hospitality businesses suggests Sheeran was at least as beneficial for the city as the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and that's been the record holder prior to this weekend. Sheeran's presence was especially noticeable in the central city, where the Octagon was transformed into a pedestrian-only area for fans, with some now hoping that pedestrian-only vibe will become a permanent thing. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
It used to be derided by critics as the elephant on the waterfront, but from the moment Sheeran's hit Castle on the Hill rang out on Thursday night, Forsyth Bar Stadium became Dunedin's stronghold, with King Ed reigning supreme. Businesses, locals and visitors alike have praised the efforts of the city to transform into the adopted home of the British hitmaker for 4 days. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull says while millions of dollars have flowed through the city during Easter weekend, the real benefits are likely to be more intangible and long-term.
I think it's benefited enormously, as much as anything, through our reputation as being a city that loves to make a festival of those sort of things, and the exposure around the world of Dunedin as a great fun place. I suspect there'll be a lot of people around the world who'll be thinking now about dropping by.
The central city was given a makeover for Sheeran's arrival. Pubs stayed open late on the sacrosanct days, and the tills of retailers clanged all weekend as people spent up large. Dave Cull says pedestrianising the lower Octagon for the weekend may also have given a glimpse into a potential future for the central city.
I suspect that there could be a push on some parts to, take another look at it and make it a permanent fixture. There's a lot of us have been saying for years that it's a no-brainer, but all around the world, pedestrianisation means more people-friendly places and just a more enjoyable and pleasant time for everyone. It just takes a wee while to sink in a conservative community.
Enterprise Dunedin director John Christie says the weekend was also a success for businesses throughout the city and wider area and has exceeded expectations.
The economic impact certainly will be reasonably significant for the city, and we know that there were a number of people from outside of the city that came. It certainly would be bigger than we've ever seen before. We're saying it's probably equivalent to Rugby World Cup for us, but I think it even far and exceeds that, and certainly does in terms of the atmosphere that was created.
John Christie says work is underway to assess the economic impact of Sheeran's visit, but his worldwide pull is already being felt due to his social media presence. One photo on Sheeran's Instagram of him getting up close and personal with Dunedin's wildlife has garnered 1.2 million likes. And it was not only retailers that felt the economic injection of Sheeran in the city. Those in the hospitality sector are buzzing after the weekend. The Otago president of the Hospitality Association, Mark Scully, says the weather gods played their part on that front.
The city was extremely busy, and leading up to the concerts was busy. The restaurants were busy, the streets were busy. Good weather helped as well. So the lower Octagon and Stewart Street being close to pedestrians, I think it made for a great atmosphere for families. And I think the fact that there was 3 concerts sort of prolonged the activity across the long weekend.
Mark Scully says he believes Sheeran's visit will have positive spin-offs for the city and its residents over coming months. And with Forsyth Bar Stadium expected to bring $100 million into the local economy this year, with artists like Pink and Shania Twain still to come, many in the city will be rubbing their hands together. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Right, let's report on a lot of things that are just breaking. This statement just out from the Minister of Defence, Ron Mark. Lieutenant General Tim Keating will finish his current term as the Chief of Defence Force on June 30. The State Services Commissioner has today begun the recruitment process for his successor. He has had an outstanding career, I'm quoting from the Minister here, which has included successes as the Commanding Officer of 1 SAS Crib 6 in Afghanistan and 2nd Land Force Group in Linton. He has served incredibly well as the Chief of Army and Chief of Defence Force. Tim is a dedicated military professional who has achieved great things in his career. The New Zealand Defence Force is in good shape, due largely to his hard work and commitment. I'd like to thank Tim for his service to New Zealand, and I wish him well in his future endeavours. I look forward to working with whomever is appointed as his replacement. We have a big program of work ahead for New Zealand Defence Force. I believe now is the right time for the next leader to stand up, be part of the decision-making process and own those decisions. That from Defence Minister Ron Mark, just in by email, of course. Tim Keating was the man who denied Nicky Hager and John Stevenson had information correct in their book, Hit and Run, about a 2010 Defence Force raid in Afghanistan. He said they had the location wrong. As it turned out, they were right and he was wrong. We're just making calls on this and desperately trying to get someone to front. More breaking news, and it looks like there are 3 balls remaining in the cricket, and the Batcaps have 3 batsmen available to survive them. So bizarre, unless something really bizarre happens, they have managed to achieve a draw in the second test against England, which means they have won the series because they won the first test. Joseph Parker may have relinquished his world champion status over the weekend, but his reputation is still intact with plans to get back in the boxing ring by August. Parker lost to Anthony Joshua in front of a capacity crowd of 78,000 in Cardiff on Sunday morning. But as our reporter in the UK, Clay Wilson, reports, a rematch could also be on the cards.
Less than an hour after losing his WBO world title to British superstar Anthony Joshua, Joseph Parker struck an understandably disappointed figure. Simmering underneath that disappointment, though, was more than a hint of determination, and Parker had a message for boxing's heavyweight division.
We enjoyed being here. We enjoyed the whole event. We enjoyed the crowd. The bigger and the better man won on the day. We still have things to go back and work on, but we're still young. We still got a lot of time. We'll be back. We'll be champion again.
Despite also being undefeated, few expected Parker to prevail against a fighter who was not only also a world champion, but owned a perfect professional record of 20 knockout wins from 20 bouts. While those predictions had proved correct, the New Zealander was the first to go the full 12 rounds with the 2012 Olympic champion from England. For that reason and others, Joshua agreed that Parker's future remained bright.
History was made. Joseph played a massive part in this, his whole camp did, and I'm honoured to share the ring with him. And what's interesting is Joseph won't give up now, do you know what I mean? He's still young, competitive, and I think we'll definitely see Joseph Parker again.
Adding his weight to that chorus of opinion was Eddie Hearn, Joshua's quick-witted and snappy dressing promoter, and currently one of boxing's most powerful people.
He wasn't good enough tonight, but he's a very good fighter and he has a good team of people around him. He has a lot of support. He's a very nice young man. We need people like Joseph Parker in the division. More people that are active and good quality heavyweights are better.
For his part, Parker very much intends to stay active. After an intense 12 weeks involving a gruelling 8-week training camp, countless commitments with the global media, and taking part in an event attracting the interest of millions around the world, there will first be a break. But asked in the immediate aftermath of the first defeat of his 25-fight professional career when his next bout might be, Parker's response was definitive.
This is just the beginning of the year. Sign me up now. Let's sign someone up now. I'm fit, I want to go again.
Just how soon that is not yet known, but Parker's trainer Kevin Barry indicates his fighter could well be back in the ring by August. Barry says a return to the same part of the world is likely.
We made a lot of friends here in the UK, and I've received an enormous amount of messages from the UK media who really complimented us and said we can't wait for you to come back. Joe performed with distinction. We've had messages from guys like Lennox Lewis saying, hey, you won a lot of fans last night, hold your head high.
As Barry's comments attest to, few are arguing Parker should be doing just that. He already has that familiar smile back on his face, and it will only get wider after some downtime back in New Zealand with his 16-month-old daughter and pregnant partner. But if Barry's reflections of his fighter's mindset after Sunday's fight in Cardiff are anything to go by, it won't be long before Parker sets out to regain his place at the pinnacle of his sport.
He apologised to me 3 or 4 times in the dressing room. Hey, I'm sorry, coach. I mean, mate, don't be sorry. You know, hey, I'm proud of you. We both know you could have probably done a little more, but you know, we're still learning, we're still developing. Goes, you know, I'll come back stronger. I said, I know you will. That's the exciting part, that he's 26 years old, and the best fights are still in front of us.
Including at some point, Barry insists, a rematch with Anthony Joshua. For Checkpoint in Cardiff, Clay Wilson.
It's about a minute before 6. People who love cricket are saying, keep us up to date with the cricket. People who don't like cricket are saying, John, you're not making any sense. But that's because cricket doesn't make any sense. And I can't take a game that actually defies all understanding and make it explicable just like that. But if you love cricket, this is quite wonderful. The Black Caps had to bat through the day. So they were trying to get a draw because they were 1-0 up in a 2-match series. And they have achieved it in the most unlikely pairing of Ish Sodhi and Neil Wagner, who have survived, I think. Between them, Sodhi faced 168 balls, Wagner faced 99 balls and scored 7 runs, but it wasn't what he scored that counted, it was the fact that he kept a pretty impressive English attack out. And so the Black Caps have drawn this game and won the series, and beating England in cricket is a bit like beating the All Blacks in rugby, and that is, it's something every country wants to do. Lots of people writing in about the fuel tax, and this person says, I live in Pakuranga, I work in the city, I can't use public transport. Why should I have to subsidise public transport when there's none available for me?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The government is considering raising fuel taxes by between 9 and 12 cents a litre as it rolls out its new transport plan. For Aucklanders, that would come on top of a regional fuel tax due to take effect in July. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
In the draft government policy statement on land transport, more money would go towards upgrading regional roads and local roads. That would be partially offset by an 11% reduction in state highway improvements. The government signalled a major increase to public transport funding and more initiatives to encourage walking and cycling. Speed limits on high-risk roads could also be reviewed. The Prime Minister says the previous government was considering a fuel tax rise of between 10 and 20 cents a litre, but her government will look in the range of 9 to 12 cents. Atu i te whare pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
The police have confirmed that an American driver was on the wrong side of the road when he hit a car, killing 2 people in Northland last night. The 21-year-old US citizen has been charged with 2 counts of careless driving causing death. He was at the wheel of a people mover that hit a Subaru head-on south of Kirikiri just after 11 o'clock, killing the 2 Northland men in their 20s. The region's traffic chief, Wayne Avis, says the crash scene told the story.
We had a police officer on the scene before it was even reported. He just happened to be on the road at the time and was the first one at the accident scene, and that was pretty clear which vehicle had crossed the centre line.
Wayne Ava says the officer tried to revive the driver with CPR, but it was too late. The accused man will appear in court in Kaikohe on Friday. The Insurance Council says it is not the responsibility of its members to pay for houses to be moved out of flood-prone areas. The Manawatu Whanganui Regional Council's long-term plan outlines proposals to buy and remove dozens of homes in Anzac Parade alongside the river in Whanganui City. The council wants to set aside $50,000 a year for the job, but wants central government and the insurance industry to contribute as well. The chief executive of the Insurance Council, Tim Grafton, has praised the Regional Council for taking a long-term view of risk, but says it's looking in the wrong place for a contribution. He says it would be better to look to those who would benefit from the homes being removed, like homeowners and banks. 12 earthquakes, including 2 over 4.5, rattled the west coast this afternoon. The 4.5 and 4.8 quakes struck near Hokitika just after 1 o'clock at a depth of just 5 kilometres. GNS duty seismologist Natalie Balfour told Checkpoint that being so near the Alpine Fault, the quakes are a timely warning for people and indeed the entire country to be prepared.
When this activity happens, it gets me a little bit, my heart racing as well, because it is obviously a large fault. It's a plate-bounding fault, so it's capable of quite large earthquakes.
Natalie Balfour says no one can tell if the quakes are a precursor to something larger. The Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little says a Ngapuhi function at Parliament this evening is not a government event and he won't be attending. The Ngapuhi Runanga, led by Sunny Tau, is holding a hui at the Beehive tonight. Mr Little says any organisation can book facilities at Parliament if an MP agrees to host it.
The MP for Te Tai Tokerau, Kelvin Davis, has agreed to be the host of the event. That's a pro forma thing. But this is a Ngapuhi event, or at least a Runanga event, but it is not a government or parliamentary event. Although I'm sure there'll be some MPs there, there'll be a lot of MPs and ministers who won't be there, myself included.
Andrew Little says the function has nothing to do with negotiations over the Ngapuhi mandate. In France, rail workers throughout the country have begun walking off the job, marking the start of 3 months of rolling strikes that are expected to cause transport chaos. The BBC's Lucy Williamson reports from Paris.
The press are calling it Black Tuesday, a show of force by France's unions that marks the start of 3 months of rolling strikes by railway workers. They'll be joined in strikes today by refuse workers, students and parts of the energy sector, all with their own specific demands over conditions and proposed reforms. And pilots and ground staff at Air France are also striking in a separate dispute over pay, though the vast majority of flights are expected to be unaffected. Railway unions plan to strike 2 days out of every 5 until the end of June to protest against President Macron's plans to change their job status and benefits.
Lucy Williamson reporting. It's 6:05. And in news just to hand, the Black Caps have drawn the game against England and won the series. Hopefully I'll have a few more details after the rest of the sports news. A New Zealand Commonwealth Games women's rugby sevens player has contracted mumps and is in isolation. Ruby Tui is being supported by a team doctor at her team's pre-games camp on the Sunshine Coast. The rest of the team will remain in isolation while further assessments are made. New Zealand squash players Joelle King and Paul Cole are not getting too carried away by their rise up the world rankings just days before they take to the courts at the Games. King is back in the top 5 for the first time since 2014, jumping 3 places to sit at number 4, making her the highest ranked women's player at the Games. And Cole is now the top ranked men's player there after climbing to 9 in the world. King is pleased to be back to her highest previous best ranking, but doubts it will have much impact on her Games performance.
There's big talk around it that we're now the top seeded ranking-wise in this Commonwealth Games, so I guess with that comes a little bit more pressure, but I think for both of us it's just kind of the rankings, the numbers, and we're here to do a job, so it doesn't really affect anything, but if anything just gives us a little confidence for the rest of the season.
Joelle King. And that's the news.
This is unacceptable. I did not sign up for this. When I prayed during the winter months, I asked the Lord to make it warm. I did not say, Lord, please bring the devil from hell and have him sit his ass crack on earth. That's not what I asked for.
Nights with Brian Crump. After the news at 7 on RNZ National.
OK, and just before we get to the weather, an update on that cricket. Yes, New Zealand have drawn the game and won the series against England. England needed to bowl them out today to win it, the second test, but New Zealand held out to the end, the final day on 256 for 7. And as I said, winning the series 1-0. Now, looking at the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Long, fine spells. A few showers developing late tomorrow morning. Waikato to Manawatu, including Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Cloudy periods. A few showers clearing south of Taranaki tomorrow morning and elsewhere by Wednesday evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, mainly fine. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington and Nelson, isolated showers clearing and becoming fine. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers with rain developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading to Westland tomorrow morning. For Southland, showers about the coast and Stewart Island, spreading inland tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and 1 or 2 showers. RNZ National. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Lovely work on updating the cricket. I actually told people that New Zealand had drawn the game and therefore won the series about 2 minutes before it actually happened.
Yeah, you're amazing. Why did you place? You should have placed a bet, hey?
I just misread the live update on Cricket Info. So they were a nerve-wracking 2 minutes because coming back and telling people we hadn't won would have been really awful. Yeah. So just to confirm, New Zealand have drawn a really formidable stonewalling effort. If you don't follow cricket, the object is either to win the game or draw the game if you've already won games in the series, and that was the position New Zealand was in. And to draw the game, we just had to keep the very good English attack out, and the responsibility to do that fell upon players who are in the team for their bowling prowess, not their batting prowess. So we were asking something of them that they are not in the team to do, and they did it rather wonderfully. They batted and batted and batted, and it wasn't glamorous and it wasn't glorious, but it was magnificently effective. So New Zealand have drawn the series and therefore beaten England, drawn the game and therefore beaten England in the series for the first time since 1999. We will talk to somebody about that hopefully before 6:30, but let's move on. Lots of feedback on motorists. This person's summing it up. Those motorists who object to subsidising public transport because they can't or don't use it should imagine what your car journey would be like without public transport. Quite a few people saying that kind of thing. Thank you for your feedback. The government is considering an increase in fuel tax and road user charges to help fund its transport plan. It has signalled a major boost to public transport funding, initiatives to encourage walking and cycling, a big increase in percentage terms, although not in monetary terms, and a cut in funding for state highways. That is a big monetary cut. In the draft government policy statement on land transport, more money would also go towards upgrading regional roads and local roads. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the funding pool for will be boosted with extra money from fuel excise and road user charge taxes.
We're giving clear direction here in our expectation around how that then is utilised. Final level details are made by them directly. And as Minister Twyford already talked about, we are consulting on, at the lower end of the range, excise increases. Simon Bridges was told that in order to meet his last government's ambitions around dual carriage highways and large-scale roading projects, they would need to increase excise by between 10 and 20 cents. We're consulting on the lower end of that range because we didn't agree with that.
Yes, Jacinda Ardern says the government is considering an increase at the pump of between 9 and 12 cents per litre. For Aucklanders, that would be on top of the 10 cent per litre regional fuel tax due to come into effect in July. That was obviously signalled before the election. Speed limits on high-risk roads could be reviewed and more median barriers and rumble strips put in place as road safety becomes a major transport priority. Now, it's very much a coalition document. The Associate Transport Minister, who is of course a Green MP, Julie Ngenta, says better public transport and safe cycling infrastructure will also help to reduce traffic and make life easier for people driving.
Every day in Auckland, a pedestrian is either killed or seriously injured after being struck by a car. That's a shocking statistic, and it's completely unacceptable. So making our towns and cities easier and safer for people to walk and cycle around is also a priority that we will see within our towns and cities. Instead of having cars and people on bikes mixing on busy roads, we'll be providing safe cycleway infrastructure that separates people from traffic. And we have a real priority of focusing around schools, because we know it's basically a birthright for our kids to be able to walk and cycle safely to school.
Julie Ngenta, let's go live to Ish Sodhi. Ish Sodhi, are you on the phone?
Yeah, g'day, John. How are you?
Yeah, well, not as good as you, bro. 168 balls. You were like the Berlin Wall. You were keeping them out so effectively. Ish, congratulations, first and foremost. That was a formidable batting effort by you. When you wandered out, what were you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, John, to be honest, I was trying to take it, cliche, down ball by ball. Colin Grantham at the time, and he was doing such a good job at the other end, looking real solid. I just felt like he was keeping things calm out in the middle, and he was just trying to build partnerships with the guys that kept coming in next. And then Neil Wagner obviously was pretty feisty at the end there and kept me going through those tough times.
Ish, for people who don't follow cricket, your job was just simply to keep a very good English attack out. And they were bowling really, really well. And there are some of the greats, Broadback really on form. Jimmy looking really, really good. And I think he's bowled more balls now than any other player in the history of Test cricket. Were you intimidated by their reputation, or were you just facing every ball at a time?
I think I was just trying to enjoy the moment. You know, these guys have obviously played for a long time, and a true cricket tragic like myself was enjoying the occasion of playing amongst some of the world's best. You know, Alistair Cook's under the lid, and so guys that have played a lot of Test cricket and were around, and so I was just trying to keep it as simple as I could, play the ball instead of the player. And obviously they had a lot of wickets behind them, but my job was pretty simple. I was trying to play as straight as I could and late and support the guy at the other end, as I hope the other person was doing for me as well.
Ish Sodhi, congratulations. I know you've got to go to the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us live. You've only been off the pitch for a couple of minutes. We're really grateful and well battered, Ish Sodhi. Thank you very much. Now, if you don't understand cricket, Ish Sodhi is in the team as a spin bowler who does a little bit of batting. Well, he did a lot of batting, 160-something deliveries. He survived against a really good England attack who were very much on top and would have expected to have gotten him out and won the game and therefore drawn the series. He's just come off the field and it was very kind of him to join us live. So the Black Caps have drawn the game and won the series. Before Ish Sodhi, we had Julianne Genter, of course, Associate Transport Minister. The police have confirmed that an American driver was on the wrong side of the road when he hit a car, killing 2 people in Northland last night. The 21-year-old US citizen has been charged with 2 counts of careless driving causing death. He was at the wheel of a people mover that hit a Subaru head-on south of Kerikeri, killing 2 Northland men in their 20s. The region's traffic chief, Wayne Avers, who we've spoken to before on this program, says the crash scene told the story.
We had a police officer on the scene before it was even reported. He just happened to be on the road at the time and was the first one at the accident scene, and that was pretty clear which vehicle had crossed the centre line.
And was he able to help?
Yes, he took immediate action with the driver of the southbound car who was unresponsive and performed CPR on that person, which obviously was unsuccessful, but he had to try, with his words.
And the passenger died as well?
Yeah, they spent some time applying first aid and emergency services to the passenger, but he died at the scene as well.
This must be so dispiriting for you. I mean, what's going on out there? What's going wrong?
For here in Northland, it stands at 17, and we're only just ticked over quarter of the year. Last year we had 40, which was almost double the year before. People need to take responsibility for themselves and their families, and it's the old rules that apply. Don't speed, don't drink and drive or drive while you're impaired, and above all, put your seatbelt on. The seatbelt won't cause the crash, but it's likely to save you. And last year, 15 of our 40 were thrown from their vehicles and died subsequently simply by not putting that seatbelt on.
And what about tourists? I mean, some of them come to the country, they've never driven on the left before. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, look, I've got some views, but I'm not sure in this particular case whether it's that or whether it's fatigue. We're still making those investigations. So, and look, we do get a number of tourists that arrive in the country. They look at New Zealand being a small country on the map and think that, well, I'm stopping off in the Bay of Islands. It's only a wee way from Auckland. I'll drive there. They don't realise that it's going to take them, 3 to 4 hours on roads that are not built for open road speed. A lot of them.
That's the region's traffic chief, Wayne Avers, talking a short time ago. The accused man will appear in court in Kaikohe on Friday. A Hamilton dairy owner robbed and attacked 3 weeks ago has taken security in his shop to a whole new level. Sandeep Patel has now installed aluminium cage-like doors so he can control who comes and goes from his shop. He received wounds to his arms and head after being struck with a machete. Andrew McRae went to his Grey Street dairy to check out the new security measures.
Sandeep Patel certainly looking a lot better than he did, having now fully recovered from the attack. He's determined not to be driven out of his shop and decided extra security measures were called for.
If the customer coming, straight away they're pulling the door. We are open from the counter, that lock, and then customer can in. Once customer in, then automatically lock here. And if the customer finish the buying and everything, and if they want to go out, and again I'm open from the here door, and then they can go out. Otherwise, they have to stay in.
Mr. Patel says it's a relief to know that anyone working in the shop will be safe from now on.
It's a shame it's come to this, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of a nice corner dairy, a nice area.
But we have to, we need our safety, first of all.
He says the new door will give him the opportunity to vet customers.
So when you're behind the counter, you look and someone arrives, you don't
yeah.
like the look of them, or they're carrying a weapon or a hoodie or something?
Yeah. So
what are you going to do?
Yeah, I'm not opening that door. And that straight away tell them, go somewhere else. We don't want any business from that guy.
Because you don't want to be assaulted again?
No.
And customers don't seem to mind and accept that added security is needed.
I think it's a great idea, personally. Just the whole... these can be dangerous areas sometimes, especially at night, so having extra security measures does keep not only the store owners but the patrons that come to shop here safe as well.
So it doesn't put you off coming to shop with that sort of...
No. Where I was raised, it's probably a lot worse, and I'd probably prefer to see those around, actually. It's just, it does help everyone keep safe.
Sundar Patel believes his legitimate customers won't mind any inconvenience around the new doors.
They are happy to see me here, but as long as I'm safe.
Mr Patel says the doors, installed by a friend, cost about $3,500. Two teenagers, aged 16 and 17, have been charged with the aggravated robbery of Mr Patel's MJ Dairy. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
6:19 you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Lots of delight coming in from people about the cricket, and also, my fairly stumbling and bumbling attempts to explain it to people who don't follow cricket. Thank you, those of you who've texted in your admiration, even though my efforts weren't great. I think my enthusiasm has been contagious. A pretty extraordinary effort by Ish Sodhi and Neil Wagner, showing character, and that is what sport's about, right? The Arab League is to hold an emergency meeting in a few hours to discuss the killing of 15 Palestinians by Israeli troops during a protest in Gaza. The violence happened at the weekend as tens of thousands of Palestinians converged on the Gaza Strip's border with Israel in a land march demanding the right to return to their ancestral homes. Israel blames Hamas for orchestrating the violence. Lots of very staunch criticism of Israel. The ABC's Norman Harmont has more.
On the busy streets of Ramallah in the West Bank, there was no rage just 2 days after 15 Palestinians were killed by Israeli soldiers when protests on the Gaza border turned deadly. Here, many like 24-year-old student Hani Adi believe there will be more violence and little change. There is no hope to achieve any peace now. There is no hope to move on with the Israelis. It's always been like that. But we have to keep trying, she said. In the battle for public opinion, Israel launched a full-scale offensive in the face of calls from the UN and the European Union for an independent investigation into the killings. In an interview with the BBC, Israel's ambassador to the UK, Mark Regev, said his country was simply defending itself.
Over the last few weeks, you've had numerous attempts by Hamas to cross into Israel through the border with squads of terrorists to kill our people. We can't allow our border to be porous. We can't allow the Hamas activists to tear down the border fence and enter Israel. We would be putting our people in danger.
As for the deaths and the more than 400 wounded by live fire, that, said Mr. Regev, is exactly what the Islamist group Hamas that runs Gaza wanted.
There's no reason for this violence, no reason whatsoever. It's only because Hamas wants to make it more tense. Hamas wants to see violence to further its very extremist agenda.
That argument is met with scorn from Palestinian leaders. Ziad Abu Zayed is a longtime negotiator and former Palestinian Authority minister.
No one wants to provoke Israel. Israel is provoking everybody. Israel is inciting the Palestinians by its continued settlement activities and by the siege on Gaza. So I expect more waves of people trying to approach the border to go back to their homes and lands inside Israel.
How do you see a way forward from where we are now? Israel and the Palestinians seem so far apart.
Well, you are right. I've been living this situation for the last 5 decades. I don't remember any time that the situation was as worse as it is now.
That's Ziad Abu Zayed, a long-time Palestinian negotiator, ending that report from Norman Harmont, the ABC. From the tennis-playing Williams sisters to the Barrett brothers all-black trio, siblings compete at the highest level of sport around the world. New Zealand has no fewer than 4 sets of siblings competing at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Sports reporter Barry Guy found out that there are issues when it comes to playing sport with those closest to you.
Yes, there'll be plenty of sibling love and support in the New Zealand team. The Leighton Davises in the badminton hall, the Robertsons on the track, Sam and Ben O'Day on the beach volleyball sand, Aaron and Jared Panchia in hockey, while the McTaggarts split their time at the track and in the weightlifting arena. This will be the second games Oliver and Susanna Leighton Davis have both attended. Oliver plays professionally in Denmark, while Susanna balances her training with work in Hamilton. They didn't start competing together until they hit the senior ranks, and Susanna says sibling rivalries help their sporting relationship.
Really cool, and I guess you'd say, like in any partnership on a sporting field, there's always work to do. And those special situations, I like to think that we have that added edge and that extra communication and level of understanding that we can often pull through in those type moments. He'll always be big brother to me. I'm pretty sure I'll always be little sister, but on the court, we've both got that same goal.
Teenage sibling rivalry was certainly an issue for the Tauranga volleyball brothers Sam and Ben O'Day. It led to them splitting earlier in their careers. Beach volleyball is debuting in the Games on the Gold Coast, and they've prepared by playing indoors in Germany. The O'Days played together in their late teens, but Ben admits it didn't go so well.
I'm sure anyone that has siblings can understand. You can't just have no filter, used to saying whatever and whenever you want to each other, so that same thing can happen on the court. So we did run into a few problems with that kind of stuff when we were younger, sort of 17, 18, 19, but we've been really good actually since we've been back together for the last sort of 18 months.
Meanwhile, brotherly love has helped the running twins Jake and Zane Robertson. They moved to Kenya as teenagers to help develop their careers. Zane admits it was initially tough, but they were able to help each other out.
I think we always kept the faith and kept the hope alive by being there for each other in the darkest hour. When one of us was always feeling down, we'd pick ourselves up or pick the other one up. We got through it together. I don't think alone was possible.
Both Zane and Jake are entered in the 10,000 metres, while Zane also has the option of running the marathon. The Gold Coast Games are completely new for Olivia and Cameron McTaggart. Olivia is the second women's pole vaulter in the team. She broke Eliza McCartney's national under-17 record last year. Injury forced Olivia out of gymnastics as a youngster, and after finishing school last year, she's now fully focused on pole vaulting. Olivia is financially supported by Athletics New Zealand, unlike her weightlifting brother who also needs to work to survive.
In pole vault, and especially athletics, we get a lot more funding than in weightlifting, and so it's a bit hard to see him not getting as much, but again, he's putting in so much effort and all the hard work and time into his sport, which is really sort of inspiring to see.
Olivia's older brother Cameron McTaggart will compete in the 77-kilogram class in the weightlifting competition. He says they've both always fought for the spotlight.
Both of us are somewhat of show-offs, so I think that we're happy to be on that big stage and give everything that we got in front of a big crowd. I'm always better on that platform than I am in training. For the majority of competitors, they get a little bit startled by that big stage, but for me, it really draws out the best of myself.
Cameron McTaggart says both he and Olivia have made plans to see each other compete on the Gold Coast, lending some family support whenever needed. For Checkpoint, Barry Guy.
Barry Guy wielding some of the old classics there. We have got some live shots coming in from the, it's about to be the naming ceremony, the flag bearer. Who will it be? This is a shot coming in from the Gold Coast now. A function is underway to name New Zealand's flag bearer for tomorrow's Commonwealth Games opening ceremony. Exactly who it will be, we don't know yet, but it won't be a black firm. The entire women's sevens team is in isolation at their camp on the Sunshine Coast after Ruby Tui was diagnosed with mumps. No one's sure whether any other players in the team have mumps. Hot contenders. Stephen Hewson, our sports editor, told us from the Gold Coast before to be named as the flag bearer in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Sophie Pascoe, There's the Governor-General. She's just got up to speak, Dame Patsy Reddy, who is live wearing a silver fern on her top. So Sophie Pascoe, which would be a really quite wonderful thing. Tom Walsh, who's actually not due to compete for more than a week, but is there, which has made him an inside runner to be the flag bearer. Liza McCartney, probably a long shot because she doesn't have the same Commonwealth Games backstory as some of the athletes, but has certainly reinvented a sport that hadn't had much attention in New Zealand. So that will be announced at 6:45 tonight. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, it's been a program full of changes tonight because of so much breaking news. We were going to bring you a story about teachers. I spent a day in the classroom last week at Birdwood Primary School out in Ranui, which is a suburb in West Auckland, with a junior teacher who's only been in the job a short amount of time, a senior teacher who went off and got a master's degree in education and has been doing it for some years, and a principal talking about whether they would become teachers again, what it's like and what you earn. This is in the context of courses of the collective, the negotiations starting in May, and it looks likely to replicate the nurse negotiations, which is that there is simply not enough money and they have become intractable and it will be very difficult to resolve them. We're seeing this with the nurses. We are probably going to see it with the teachers. So tomorrow on Checkpoint we will look at the life of teachers in a primary school in West Auckland. Let's roll the sting and end the show for tonight. Thank you everyone for being with us. We really appreciate your company. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, that is the program for tonight. We will be back with teachers and more. In fact, we're hoping to have a very big story tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Fuel tax rises of up to 12 cents a litre are being considered by the government in its new transport plan. Police say a 21-year-old American driver was on the wrong side of the road when he hit a car, killing 2 people in Northland last night. GNS says today's earthquakes that rattled the west coast are a timely warning for people to be quake prepared. Dunedin is expecting a $34 million cash injection thanks to pop superstar Ed Sheeran's visit. And the Black Caps have pulled off an audacious draw to win the first Test series against England since 1999. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Jack White made his name with the stark minimalism of the White Stripes, but on his new solo album, he takes everything to the max. I'm Nick Bollinger and I'll be reviewing Jack White's Boarding House Reach in the sampler.
You and me, let's not be friends.
I'll be discussing the latest set from local duo Hopetown Bros.